Good evening. You know, hello. I always get, I still get nervous whenever I hit these, like, go live buttons. I never have very much to say besides saying, I hope you're having a good evening. I hope you're having a good night or a good morning wherever you are. And I hope you can hear me. I hope my volume is doing okay. I managed to start the stream properly this time. Last time, it was a bit funny. I started it, and I have it set up to dual stream onto Twitch and YouTube, just because I thought it would be neat. And Twitch is very easy, where if you just hit the start button, it starts. YouTube is a bit more complicated, where you have to hit 2 buttons. So I only hit the first one. So I was live for about 20-30 minutes before I realized it wasn't up on YouTube. So that's what that was last time. Either way, I'm glad to see you. If there's anyone who's gonna watch this video afterwards, I'll be glad to see you then too. And I'll be reading you some bedtime stories tonight. Partly because I find reading bedtime stories relaxing. I get sleepy reading the stories to people. I get sleepy doing repetitive tasks or being in warm places. So if you get drowsy, just know I'm probably drowsy with you. Let's see, which stories did I pick out for tonight? I would like to do other streams besides bedtime stories, but I think it's fun. And I'm afraid of sitting in silence and having to talk for the whole time. So I will fill my voice with these stories. Let's see. The first one I picked out for tonight is The Turnip. And I picked this one purely by name. And I read the ending. I thought it was funny. There were 2 brothers who were both soldiers. One was rich, and the other poor. The poor man thought he would try to better himself. So, pulling off his red coat, he became a gardener, and dug his ground well, and sowed turnips. When the seed came up, there was one plant bigger than all the rest, and it kept getting larger and larger. Oh, Icarus, thank you for the first super chat. Good afternoon from South Korea. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for supporting me and for coming all the time. I think I didn't mention this before. I think I will probably read the story full way through, or wait to get to a natural breaking point if it's a very long story, and then I'll read all the messages that come in, if there are messages. So thank you so much for chatting and participating. Go back to it. When the seed came up, there was one plant bigger than all the rest, and it kept getting larger and larger, and it seemed as if it would never cease growing, so that it might have been called the Prince of Turnips, for there never was such a one seen before, and never will again. At last it was so big that it filled a cart, and 2 oxen could hardly draw it, and the gardener knew not what in the world to do with it, nor whether it would be a blessing or a curse to him. One day he said to himself, "What shall I do with it? If I sell it, it will bring no more than another, and for eating, the little turnips are better than this." The best thing is perhaps to carry it and give it to the king as a mark of respect." Then he yoked his oxen and drew the turnip to the court and gave it to the king. "What a wonderful thing," said the king. "I have seen many strange things, but such a monster as this I never saw. Where did you get the seed? Or is it only your good luck? If so, you are a true child of fortune." "Ah, no," answered the gardener. "I am no child of fortune. I am a poor soldier who could never get enough to live upon. So I laid aside my red coat and set to work, tilling the ground. I have a brother who is rich, and your majesty knows him well, and all the world knows him, but because I am poor, everyone forgets me." The king then took pity on him and said, "You shall be poor no longer. I will give you so much that you will be even richer than your brother." Then he gave him gold and lands and flocks, and made him so rich that his brother's fortune could not at all be compared with his. When the brother heard of all this, and how a turnip had made the gardener so rich, he envied him sorely, and bethought himself, how could he contrive to get the same good fortune for himself? However, he determined to manage more cleverly than his brother, and got together a rich present of gold and fine horses for the king, and thought he must have a much larger gift in return. For if his brother had received so much for only a turnip, what must his present be worth? The king took the gift very graciously, and said he knew not what to give in return more valuable and wonderful than the great turnip. So the soldier was forced to put it in a cart and drag it home with him. When he reached home, he knew not upon whom to vent his rage and spite, and at length wicked thoughts came into his head, and he resolved to kill his brother, which seems like a bit of an overreaction if you ask me. So he hired some villains to murder him, and, having shown them where to lie in ambush, he went to his brother and said, "Dear brother, I have found a hidden treasure. Let us go and dig it up, and share it between us." The other had no suspicions of his roguery, so they went out together. And as they were traveling along, the murderers rushed out upon him, bound him, and were going to hang him on a tree. But whilst they were all getting ready, they heard the trampling of a horse at a distance, which so frightened them that they pushed their prisoner neck and shoulders together into a sack, and swung him up by a cord to the tree, where they left him dangling, and ran away. Meantime he worked and worked and worked away, till he made a hole large enough to put out his head. When the horseman came up, he proved to be a student, a merry fellow, who was journeying along on his nag, and singing as he went. As soon as the man in the sack saw him passing under the tree, he cried out, "Good morning to thee, my friend." The student looked about everywhere, and, seeing no one, and not knowing where the voice came from, cried out, "Who calls me?" Then the man in the tree answered, "Lift up thine eyes, for behold, here I sit, in a sack of wisdom. Here have I, in a short time, learned great and wondrous things. Compared to this seat, all the learnings of the schools is empty air. A little longer, and I shall know all that man can know, and shall come forth wiser than the wisest of mankind. Here I discern the signs and motions of the heavens and the stars, the laws that control the winds, the number of the sands on the seashore, the healing of the sick, the virtues of all simples, of birds, and of precious stones. Wert thou once but here, my friend, thou would feel and own the power of knowledge. The student listened to all this and wondered much. At last he said, "Blessed be the day and hour when I found you. Cannot you contrive to let me into the sack for a little while?" Then the other answered, as if very unwillingly, "A little space I may allow thee to sit here, if thou wilt reward me well, and entreat me kindly. But thou must tarry yet an hour below, till I have learnt some matters that are yet unknown to me." So the student himself sat down and waited a while, but the time hung heavy upon him, and he begged earnestly that he might ascend forthwith, for his thirst for knowledge was great. Then the other pretended to give way, and said, "Thou must let the sack of wisdom descend, by untying yonder cord, and then thou shalt enter." So the student let him down, opened the sack, and set him free. "Now then," cried he, "let me ascend quickly." As he began to put himself into the sack, heels first. "Wait a while," said the gardener. "That is not the way." Then he pushed him in head first, tied up the sack, and soon swung up the searcher after wisdom, dangling in the air. "How is it with thee, friend?" said he. "Dost thou not feel that wisdom comes unto thee? Rest there in peace, till thou art a wiser man than thou wert." So saying, he trotted off on the student's nag, and left the poor fellow to gather wisdom till somebody should come and let him down. The end. That is a silly story. The turnip was only really relevant for the first half. I guess it was important to start the story, but it would have been nice if it came back in the end. Nothing ever happened to the brother who tried to kill the main character. Let's see. This one, the second one I chose, is called The Raven. There was once a queen who had a little daughter, still too young to run alone. One day the child was very troublesome, and the mother could not quiet it, do what she would. She grew impatient, and, seeing the ravens flying round the castle, she opened the window and said, "I wish you were a raven and would fly away. Then I should have a little peace." That's harsh. Scarcely were the words out of her mouth when the child in her arms was turned into a raven and flew away from her through the open window. The bird took its flight to a dark wood and remained there for a long time. And meanwhile the parents could hear nothing of their child. Long after this, a man was making his way through the wood when he heard a raven calling, and he followed the sound of the voice. As he drew near, the raven said, "I am by birth a king's daughter, but am now under the spell of some enchantment. You can, however, set me free "What am I to do?" he asked. She replied, "Go farther into the wood until you come to a house, wherein lives an old woman. She will offer you food and drink, but you must not take of either. If you do, you will fall into a deep sleep, and will not be able to come help me. In the garden behind the house is a large tan heap, and on that you must stand and watch for me. I shall drive there in my carriage at 2 o'clock in the afternoon for 3 successive days. The first day it will be drawn by 4 white, the second by 4 chestnut, and the last by 4 black horses. But if you fail to keep awake and I find you sleeping, I shall not be set free." Man promised to do all that she wished, but the raven said, "Alas, I know even now that you will take something from the woman and be unable to save me." The man assured her again that he would, on no account, touch a thing to eat or drink. When he came to the house and went inside, the old woman met him and said, "Poor man, how tired you are. Come in and rest, and let me give you something to eat and drink." "No," answered the man, "I will neither eat nor drink." But she would not leave him alone, and urged him, saying, "If you will not eat anything, at least you might take a draught of wine. One drink counts for nothing." And at last he allowed himself to be persuaded, and drank. As it drew towards the appointed hour, he went outside into the garden and mounted the tan heap to await the raven. Suddenly a feeling of fatigue came over him, and, unable to resist it, he lay down for a little while, fully determined, however, to keep awake. But in another minute his eyes closed of their own accord, and he fell into such a deep sleep that all the noises in the world would not have awakened him. At 2 o'clock the raven came driving along, drawn by her 4 white horses. But even before she reached that spot, she said to herself, sighing, "I know he has fallen asleep." When she entered the garden, there she found him as she had feared, lying on the tan heap, fast asleep. She got out of her carriage and went to him. She called him and shook him, but it was all in vain. He still continued sleeping. The next day at noon, the old woman came to him again with food and drink, which he at first refused. At last, overcome by her persistent entreaties that he would take something, he lifted the glass and drank again. Towards 2 o'clock he went into the garden and onto the tan heap to watch for the raven. He had not been there long before he began to feel so tired that his limbs seemed hardly able to support him, and he could not stand upright any longer. So again he lay down and fell fast asleep. As the raven drove along her 4 chestnut horses, she said sorrowfully to herself, "I know he has fallen asleep." She went as before to look for him, but he slept, and it was impossible to awaken him. The following day, the old woman said to him, "What is this? You are not eating or drinking anything. Do you want to die?" He answered, "I may not and will not eat or drink." But she put down the dish of food and the glass of wine in front of him, and when he smelt the wine, he was unable to resist the temptation, and took a deep draught. When the hour came around again, he was, as usual, on to the tan heap in the garden to await the king's daughter. But he felt even more overcome with weariness than on the 2 previous days, and, throwing himself down, he slept like a log. At 2 o'clock the raven could be seen approaching, and this time her coachman and everything about her, as well as her horses, were black. She was sadder than ever as she drove along, and said mournfully, "I know he has fallen asleep, and will not be able to set me free." She found him sleeping heavily, and all her efforts to awaken him were of no avail. Then she placed beside him a loaf, and some meat, and a flask of wine, of such a kind that, however much he took of them, they would never grow less. After that she drew a gold ring, on which her name was engraved, off her finger, and put it upon one of his. Finally, she laid a letter near him, in which, after giving him particulars of the food and drink she had left for him, she finished with the following words: "I see that as long as you remain here, you will never be able to set me free. If, however, you still wish to do so, come to the golden castle of Stromberg. This is well within your power to accomplish." She then returned to her carriage and drove to the golden castle of Stromberg. When the man awoke and found that he had been sleeping, he was grieved at heart, and said, "She has no doubt been here and driven away again, and it is now too late for me to save her." Then his eyes fell on the things which were lying beside him. He read the letter, and knew from it all that had happened. He rose up without delay, eager to start on his way and to reach the castle of Stromberg. But he had no idea in which direction he ought to go. He traveled about a long time. Sorry about that. Technical issues. Let's see. A little bit sleepy. He traveled about a long time in search of it, and came at last to a dark forest, through which he went on walking for 14 days, and still could not find a way out. Once more the night came on, and worn out, he lay down under a bush and fell asleep. Again the next day he pursued his way through the forest, and that evening, thinking to rest again, he lay down as before. But he heard such a howling and wailing that he found it impossible to sleep. He waited till it was darker and people had begun to light up their homes, and then, seeing a little glimmer ahead of him, he went towards it. He found that the light came from a house which looked smaller than it really was, from the contrast of its height with that of an immense giant who stood in front of it. He thought to himself, "If the giant sees me going in, my life will not be worth much." However, after a while, he summoned up courage and went forward. When the giant saw him, he called out, "It is lucky for that you have come, for I have not had anything to eat for a long time. I can have you now for my supper." "I would rather you let that alone," said the man, "for I do not willingly give myself up to be eaten. If you are wanting food, I have enough to satisfy your hunger." "If that is so," replied the giant, "I will leave you in peace. I only thought of eating you because I had nothing else." So they went indoors and sat down, and the man brought out the bread, meat, and wine, which, although he had eaten and drunk off them, were still unconsumed. The giant was pleased with the good cheer, and ate and drank to his heart's content. When he had finished his supper, the man asked him if he could still direct him to the castle, but he could not find it. "Or to the castle of Stromberg," the giant said. "I will look on my map. On it are marked all the towns, villages, and houses." So he fetched his map and looked for the castle, but he could not find it. "Never mind," he said. "I have larger maps upstairs in the cupboard. We will look on those." But they searched in vain, for the castle was not marked even on these. The man now thought he should like to continue his journey, but the giant begged him to remain for a day or two longer, until the return of his brother, who was away in search of provisions. When the brother came home, they asked him about the castle of Stromberg, and he told them he would look on his own maps as soon as he had eaten and appeased his hunger. Accordingly, when he had finished his supper, they all went up together to his room and looked through his maps, but the castle was nowhere to be found. Then he fetched other, older maps, and they went on looking for the castle until at last they found it. But it was many thousand miles away. "How shall I be able to get there?" asked the man. "I have 2 hours to spare," said the giant, "and I will carry you into the neighborhood of the castle. I must then return to look after the child who is in our care." The giant, thereupon, carried the man to within about 100 leagues of the castle, where he left him, saying, "You will be able to walk the remainder of the way yourself." The man journeyed on day and night till he reached the golden castle of Stromberg. He found it situated, however, on a glass mountain. Looking up from the foot, he saw the enchanted maiden drive round her castle and then go inside. He was overjoyed to see her, and longed to get to the top of the mountain, but the sides were so slippery that every time he attempted to climb he fell back again. When he saw it was impossible to reach her, he was greatly grieved, and said to himself, "I will remain here and wait for her." So he built himself a little hut, and there he sat and watched for a whole year, and every day he saw the king's daughter driving round her castle, but still was unable to get nearer to her. Looking out from his hut one day, he saw 3 robbers fighting, and he called out to them, "God be with you." They stopped when they heard the call, but looking round and seeing nobody, they went on again with their fighting, which now became even more furious. "God be with you," he cried again, and again they paused and looked about, but seeing no one, went back to their fighting. A third time he called out, "God be with you." And then, thinking he should like to know the cause of dispute between the 3 men, he went out and asked them why they were fighting so angrily with one another. One of them said that he had found a stick, and and that he had but to strike it against any door through which he wished to pass, and it immediately flew open. Another told him that he had found a cloak which rendered its wearer invisible, and the third had caught a horse which would carry its rider over any obstacle, even up the glass mountain. They had been unable to decide whether they would keep together and have the things in common, or whether they would separate. On hearing this, the man said, "I will give you something in exchange for those 3 things. Not money, for that I have not got, but something that is of far more value. I must first, however, prove whether all you have told me about your 3 things is true." The robbers, therefore, made him get on the horse, and handed him the stick and the cloak. And when he had put this round him, he was no longer visible. Then he fell upon them with the stick and beat them one after another, crying, "There, you idle vagabonds, you have got what you deserve. Are you satisfied now?" That's crazy. After this, he rode up the glass mountain. When he reached the gates of the castle, he found it closed, but he gave it a blow with his stick, and it flew wide open at once, and he passed through. He mounted the steps and entered the room where the maiden was sitting, and with a golden goblet full of wine in front of her. She could not see him, for he still wore his cloak. He took the ring which she had given him off his finger, and threw it into the goblet, so that it rang as it touched the bottom. "That is my own ring," she exclaimed, "and if that is so, the man must also be here, who is coming to set me free." She sought for him about the castle, but could find him nowhere. Meanwhile, he had gone outside again, and mounted his horse, and thrown off his cloak. When therefore she came to the castle gate, she saw him, and cried aloud for joy. Then he dismounted and took her in his arms, and she kissed him, and said, "Now you have indeed set me free, and tomorrow we will celebrate our marriage." The end. Straight from invisibility to marriage. That is crazy. Let's see. Oh, some new chat messages came in while I was reading. Hello. I'm glad you like bedtime stories. I like reading them, so I'm glad I can do that together with you guys. That was a fun story, except just like in the turnip, the raven didn't factor into a lot of the story at all, did it? Like the first half. I guess they decide the titles by the first half of the story. So in the end, the man didn't cure the princess and didn't save her, but he did go find her, so I suppose we'll give him credit for that. Those emojis are so cute, Icarus. Thank you, I'm glad you're enjoying it. Let's see. I picked a third one. Let's see. This one seems good. This one is called The Water of Life. Long before you or I were born, there reigned, in a country a great way off, a king who had 3 sons. This king once fell very ill, so ill that nobody thought he could live. His sons were very much grieved at their father's sickness, and, as they were walking together very mournfully in the garden of the palace, a little old man met them and asked what was the matter. They told him that their father was very ill, and that they were afraid nothing could save him. "I know what would," said the little old man. "It is the water of life. If he could have a draught of it, he would be well again. But it is very hard to get." Then the eldest son said, "I will soon find it." And he went to the sick king, and begged that he might go in search of the water of life, as it was the only thing that could save him. "No," said the king. "I had rather die than place you in such great danger as you must meet with in your journey." But he begged so hard that the king let him go. And the prince thought to himself, "If I bring my father this water, he will make me sole heir to his kingdom." Then he set out, and when he had gone on his way some time, he came to a deep valley, overhung with rocks and woods, and as he looked around, he saw, standing above him on one of the rocks, a little ugly dwarf. Don't have to call him ugly. With a sugar-loaf cap and a scarlet cloak. And the dwarf called to him and said, "Prince, whither so fast?" "What is that to thee, you ugly imp?" said the prince haughtily, and he rode on. But the dwarf was so enraged at his behavior, which he should be. It was quite rude, and laid a fairy spell of ill luck upon him, so that as he rode on the mountain pass, it became narrower and narrower, and at last the way was so straitened that he could not go to step forward. And when he thought to have turned his horse round and go back the way he came, he heard a loud laugh ringing around him, and found that the path was closed behind him, so that he was shut in all round. He next tried to get off his horse and make his way on foot, but again the laugh rang in his ears, and he found himself unable to move a step, and thus he was forced to abide spellbound. Meantime the old king was lingering on in daily hope of his son's return, till at last the second son said, "Father, I will go in search of the water of life." For he thought to himself, "My brother is surely dead, and the kingdom will fall to me if I find the water." The king was, at first, very unwilling to let him go, but at last yielded to his wish. So he set out and followed the same road which his brother had done, and met with the same elf, who stopped him at the same spot in the mountains, saying, as before, "Prince, Prince, whither so fast?" "Mind your own affairs, busybody," said the prince scornfully, and he rode on. But the dwarf put the same spell upon him as he put upon his elder brother, and he, too, was at last obliged to take up his abode in the heart of the mountains. Thus it is with proud, silly people, who think themselves above everyone else, and are too proud to ask or take advice. When the second prince had thus been gone a long time, the youngest son said he would go and search for the water of life, and trusted he should soon be able to make his father well again. So he set out, and the dwarf met him too at the same spot in the valley, among the mountains, and said, "Prince, whither so fast?" And the prince said, "I am going in search of the water of life, because my father is ill and like to die. Can you help me? Pray be kind and aid me if you can." "Do you know where it is to be found?" asked the dwarf. "No," said the prince, "I do not. Pray tell me if you know." "Then, as you have spoken to me kindly, and are wise enough to seek for advice, I will tell you how and where to go." The water you seek springs from a well in an enchanted castle, and, that you may be able to reach it in safety, I will give you an iron wand and 2 little loaves of bread. Strike the iron door of the castle 3 times with the wand, and it will open. 2 hungry lions will be lying down inside, gaping for their prey. But if you throw them the bread, they will let you pass. Then hasten on to the well, and take some of the water of life before the clock strikes 12. For if you tarry longer than that, the door will shut upon you forever. Then the prince thanked his little friend with the scarlet cloak for his friendly aid, and took the wand and the bread, and went traveling on, over sea and under land, till he came to his journey's end, and found everything to be as the dwarf had told him. The door flew open at the 3rd stroke of the wand, and when the lions were quieted, he went on through the castle, and came at length to a beautiful hall. Around it he saw several knights sitting in a trance. Then he pulled off their rings and put them on his own fingers. In another room he saw on a table a sword and a loaf of bread, which he also took. Further on he came to a room where a beautiful young lady sat upon a couch, and she welcomed him joyfully, and said, if he would free her, set her free from the spell that bound her, the kingdom should be his, if he would come back in a year and marry her. Then she told him that the well that held the water of life was in the palace gardens, and bade him make haste, and draw what he wanted before the clock struck 12. He walked on, and as he walked through beautiful gardens, he came to a delightful shady spot, in which stood a couch. He thought to himself, as he felt tired, that he would rest himself for a while, and gaze on the lovely scenes around him. So he laid himself down, and sleep fell upon him unawares, so that he did not wake up till the clock was striking 11:45. Then he sprang from the couch, dreadfully frightened, ran to the well, filled a cup that was standing by him full of water, and hastened to get away in time. Just as he was going out of the iron door, it struck 12, and the door fell so quickly upon him that it snapped off a piece of his heel. When he found himself safe, he was overjoyed to think that he had got the water of life, and as he was going on his way homewards, he passed by the little dwarf, who, when he saw the sword and the loaf, said, "You have made a noble prize. With the sword you can, at a blow, slay whole enemies, and the bread will never fail you." Then the prince thought to himself, "I cannot go home to my father without my brothers." So he said, "My dear friend, cannot you tell me where my 2 brothers are, who set out in search of the water of life before me, and never came back? I have shut them up by a charm between 2 mountains," said the dwarf, "because they were proud and ill-behaved, and scorned to ask advice." The prince begged so hard for his brothers that the dwarf at last set them free, though unwillingly, saying, "Beware of them, for they have bad hearts." Their brother, however, was greatly rejoiced to see them, and told them all that had happened to him, how he had found the water of life, and had taken a cup full of it, and how he had set a beautiful princess free from a spell that bound her, and how she had engaged to wait a whole year, and then to marry him, and then to give him the kingdom. Then they all 3 rode on together, and on their way home came a country that was laid waste by war and a dreadful famine, so it was feared all must die for want. But the prince gave the king of the land the bread, and all his kingdom ate of it. And he lent the king the wonderful sword, and he slew the enemy's army with it. And thus the kingdom was once more in peace and plenty. In the same manner he befriended 2 other countries, through which they passed on their way. When they came to the sea, they got into a ship, and during their voyage the 2 eldest said to themselves, "Our brother has caught the water which he could not find. Therefore our father will forsake us and give him the kingdom, which is our right." So they were full of envy and revenge, and agreed together how they could ruin him. Then they waited till he was fast asleep, and poured the water of life out of the cup, and took it for themselves, giving him bitter sea water instead. When they came to their journey's end, the youngest son brought his cup to the sick king, that he might drink and be healed. Scarcely, however, had he tasted the bitter sea water when he became even worse than he was before. And then both the elder sons came in, and blamed the youngest for what they had done, and said that he wanted to poison their father, but that they had found the water of life, and had brought it with them. He no sooner began to drink of what they had brought him, that he felt his sickness leave him, and was as strong as well as in his younger days. Then they all went to their brother, and laughed at him, and said, "Well, brother, you found the water of life, did you? You have had the trouble, and we shall have the reward. Pray, for all your cleverness, why did you not manage to keep your eyes open? Next year one of us will take away your beautiful princess if you do not take care. You had better say nothing about this to our father, for he does not believe a word you say. And if you tell tales, you shall lose your life in the bargain. But be quiet, and we will let you off." The old king was still very angry with his youngest son, and thought that he really meant to have taken away his life. So he called the court together, and asked what should be done, and all agreed that he ought to be put to death. The prince knew nothing of what was going on, till one day, when the king's chief huntsman went a-hunting with him, and they were alone in the wood together. The huntsman looked so sorrowful that the prince said, "My friend, what is the matter with you?" "I cannot and dare not tell you," said he. But the prince begged very hard, and said, "Only tell me what it is, and do not think I shall be angry, for I will forgive you." "Alas," said the huntsman, "the king has ordered me to shoot you." The prince started at this, and said, "Let me live, and I will change dresses with you. You shall take my royal coat to show my father, and do give me your shabby one." "With all my heart," said the huntsman. "I am sure I should be glad to save you, for I could not have shot you." Then he took the prince's coat, gave him the shabby one, and went away through the wood. That's nice. Some time after, 3 grand embassies came to the old king's court, with rich gifts of gold and precious stones for his youngest son. Now all of these were sent from the 3 kings to whom he had lent his sword and loaf of bread, in order to rid them of their enemy and feed their people. This touched the old king's heart, and he thought his son might still be guiltless, and said to his court, "Oh, that my son were still alive! How it grieves me that I had him killed." Okay. "He is still alive," said the huntsman, and I am glad I had pity on him. But let him go in peace, and brought home his royal coat. At this the king was overwhelmed with joy, and made it known throughout all his kingdom that if his son would come back to his court, he would forgive him. Meanwhile, the princess was eagerly waiting till her deliverer should come back, and had a road made leading up to her palace, all of shining gold, and told her courtiers that whoever came on horseback and rode straight up to the gate upon it was her true lover, and that they must let him in. But whoever rode on one side of it, they must be sure was not the right one, and they must send him away at once. The time soon came when the elder brother thought he might make haste to go see the princess, and say that he was the one who had set her free, and that he should have her for his wife, and the kingdom with her. As he came before the palace and saw the golden road, he stopped to look at it, and he thought to himself, "It is a pity to ride upon this beautiful road." So he turned aside and rode on the right-hand side of it. But when he came to the gate, the guards, who had seen the road he took, said to him he could not be who he said he was, and must go about his business. The second prince set out soon afterwards on the same errand, and when he came to the golden road, and his horse had set one foot upon it, he stopped to look at it, and thought it was very beautiful, and said to himself, "What a pity it is that anything should tread here." Then he too turned aside and rode on the left side of it. But when he came to the gate, the guards said he was not the true prince, and that he too must go away about his business. And away he went. Now, when the full year has come round, the third brother left the forest in which he had lain hid for fear of his father's anger, and set out in search of his betrothed bride. So he continued on, thinking of her all the way, and rode so quickly that he did not even see what the road was made of, but went with his horse straight over it. And as he came to the gate, it flew open, and the princess welcomed him with joy, and said he was her deliverer, and should now be her husband and lord of the kingdom. When the first joy at their meeting was over, the princess told him that she had heard of his father having forgiven him, and of his wish to have him home again. So, before his wedding with the princess, he went to visit his father, taking her with him. Then he told him everything, how his brothers had cheated and robbed him, and yet that he had borne all those wrongs for the love of his father. And the old king was very angry, and wanted to punish his wicked sons. But they made their escape, and got into a ship and sailed away over the wide sea. And where they went to, nobody knew, and nobody cared. And now the old king gathered together his court, and asked all his kingdom to come and celebrate the wedding of his son and the princess. And young and old, noble and squire, gentle and simple, came at once on the summons, and among the rest came the friendly dwarf, with the sugar-loaf hat and a new scarlet cloak. And the wedding was held, and the merry bells rung, and all the good people they danced and they sung, and feasted and frolicked I can't tell how long. The end. Are you sleepy yet? Let's see. I'll check the messages that came in during that time. William Broadfoot, this live is amazing and so underrated. You need more people. Thank you. I'm glad you feel that way. Honestly, when I started doing this, I wasn't sure that anybody would come and listen to me just read stories in an uninteresting way, but if anybody enjoys listening to me, that makes me very happy. That's about all I had planned for today. I think 3 stories is a good amount to be listening to. And I'm feeling a bit sleepy. I told you I get sleepy after spending time. Even after, if I read novels at night, if I'm in a certain mood, after a while, I will get sleepy. So I will say, it's been a pleasure reading to you. Thank you to everybody who stopped by, everybody who left a chat message, everybody who listened even just a little bit. Thank you to Icarus for a first super, which is so crazy. Thank you so much. I hope you have a good afternoon. I hope everyone has a good night. If you are in bed, I hope I could contribute to your feeling of sleepiness. And with that, I'll say good night to you. Good night, and sweet dreams.